Hello, YouTube. Welcome to Ranting Politics. Today we're going to be talking about protests, rioting, and the third party. Now, to start us off, I think that protesting in general is a subject that, has been pushed to the forefront of national attention. So it would be kind of important for, at least for me, as far as I can see, to give you at least a clear idea on why I think that protesting is necessary. So for one thing, a lot of people have this idea in their head that protesting can't lead to any real change. It's a waste of your time. You're just standing around outside doing a whole lot of nothing, running the risk of getting arrested by the police or worse. As we've seen in a lot of these videos, we've seen people run over with police cars. We've seen people shot in the head with rubber bullets, which is against police policy in general, as far as I know, that police are supposed to be shooting people in the chest or in their limbs, not in the head or the heart. So maybe not in the chest, more like the abdomen area, I suppose. But that's what's happening. Police are using rubber bullets in a lethal way when they shouldn't be. A lot of them have been abusing tear gas to break up these groups, right? So why run the risk in the first place? Well, because as far as we can tell, there has been some legitimate and significant change on the part of our policymakers because of these protests. For one thing, the police who've been abusing their use of force, answering protests against police violence with police violence, this has gotten a lot of national attention. People actually care that the police are abusing their power in this way, and in seeing that their abuse of their power is being met with more abuse, policymakers are actually doing their best to take this into account and actually change, as far as we can see, how police are trained. We're seeing this in cities like LA, Minneapolis, all over the country. Specifically things like police being trained to not use the carotid restraint, which is the form of chokehold that was used on George Floyd that ended his life, and also other people like Eric Garner back in 2014. So, okay, police training is being changed. Great, that's a great start. Police are also, as individuals, being held accountable. For one thing, it could be argued that these protests, not only within the US but around the globe, have encouraged a more serious conviction on the part of our judicial system, basically taking the people who killed George Floyd and holding them accountable. While in the past, this has not been the case. I mean, we can go as far as Rodney King and the fact that the police who beat him for seemingly no reason, and the fact that it was caught on camera, you have hard evidence that this happened, those police were still allowed to basically avoid prison time, which led to the LA riots. This idea that we've been abused for so long and we can only take so much. It's finally time for people to snap and lose control. So from the perspective of why these protests are happening, or why protest, well, it seems that they've absolutely had an impact on our police training policy, on whether or not they are punished, on whether or not that police brutality is an acceptable form of conduct today, in the modern day. 21 years, as far as I know, after Rodney King, because I think it happened in 99 or 96. I could be wrong about that. But two and a half decades after that, things are finally changing, for the better. And these riots and these protests are actually having an impact. So why avoid protesting when they can actually benefit people's lives and make up for the harm that's been done? Because we could even see a situation like Breonna Taylor, who had a no-knock search warrant for her home. The police break in, of course, not knocking, not waiting for her to interact with them in any meaningful way, and they kill her in her home while she is minding her own business. And whether or not she is somebody that committed a crime, and as far as I can tell, she was not a part of any criminal activity, and again, as far as I know, whether or not she was a criminal or not, the police should not be allowed to just willy-nilly kill anybody they want. use a no-knock search warrant and then kill somebody and then not face any punishment themselves. Granted, it's part of the job, but this should not be happening. And she was a mother, she was a part of people's family, and now she is gone. And there should be some kind of reconciliation for that. Her family should have justice given to them for this horrible tragedy to happen in their lives. And these protests are not standing up for just George Floyd. They're standing up for Breonna Taylor. As far as I can tell, people are talking about her quite a bit. And, plenty of other names. As I'm scrolling through Twitter, I see, why is nobody talking about this person? Why is nobody talking about X person? And retweeting and liking a post is great and all that, but I at least feel like creating this video is one way I can make amends for my inaction with all these causes, right? And at least defending protesting from my perspective as why that's a useful tool, why that can still help people gain some type of justice for the horrible things that have happened to them and their families. So saying that protesting is useless, or it's just an annoyance, or it shuts down businesses, or while these things may be true, a night of protesting can do terrible things for the public transit system and for general car traffic in general in a city. That, at least in my opinion, is a small price to pay for getting some type of attention towards this problem. And we're not seeing protests just in America, it's international. In Europe, in Asia, in Africa, Australia, New Zealand. Seems the whole world has come up in protest of these horrible things. And that says something. Millions and millions of people. You can't deny what the potential for change that we're seeing today. So for the next part of this discussion, I think it's important for us to touch on rioting, and for us to think about exactly where that line between protesting and rioting begins. And just so I'm clear on what I mean by rioting, I would see it as any disorganized upheaval where people are reacting violently to the police, or they're looting, or they're committing arson, burning down police headquarters, which I've seen happen in a few cities, including Minneapolis, where I couldn't find any statistic for this. It was just something I heard, but I heard there were hundreds of people dying within the first day of the Minneapolis protests because they'd spiraled out of control into riots. Now, it's important to remember that rioting is an element of protesting. It is a natural progression from protesting because you've got all these people in a public area, and once there is some degree of confrontation, and you can even see this begun by the police, people known as agent provocateurs, police who enter the lines of protesters and do things to incite violence, to give police an excuse to come in and commit arrests. So this whole idea that rioting is certainly a dangerous thing that's cost people a lot of lives over the weeks of these protests. We also have to remember that the police are not the heroes in this situation. A lot of the times, and from a lot of the videos I've seen, they've gone out of their way to commit violence and to put people in confrontational situations and to use tear gas and rubber bullets not against strictly violent protesters, but to, in the flash of a minute, target everyone as a threat. And again, when we're talking about rethinking our police training, that is one element of police training that people are absolutely getting upset about. People want the police to start prioritizing who they attack and who they don't. And some of the police training from LA, I saw at least, they are setting up a system where if one officer commits violence in a way that is not applicable to the current situation, if that police officer is creating a violent situation where there was none to begin with, their fellow officers are at least encouraged and expected to report the actions of that officer. So hopefully that has the impact, the desired impact that policymakers want, which is a lower degree of unneeded violence, of police brutality where it is not necessary. And again, with things like tear gas bans that you're seeing in cities like Seattle, you do kind of have that same expectation that, okay, you cannot use tear gas unless it is a situation that demands its use, a violent situation that cannot be calmed down without tear gas. Because in a lot of these protests, you see that abuse of police authority and police equipment to answer protests with violence in a way that is not necessary, it could be argued. And bringing this back around to rioting, when we're talking about the police are instigating these riots just as much as the protesters do, we are put in a dangerous situation here, especially since rioting is a progression from protesting. We have a situation where you can't have protesting without the possibility of rioting. And if you support protesting but you don't support rioting, how do I come to terms with that difference? And it is definitely a morally dangerous position to put myself in, because I do sit here saying I support protests, but rioting I'm on the fence about. So how can I really defend that position? Well, it's not an easy topic to be involved in the first place. You can sit here and say protesting and rioting shouldn't be done in the first place. It's unacceptable. It should never happen. And yet, protesting has resulted in positive change for the people. Rioting has taken a lot of lives and destroyed a lot of property. But in Minneapolis, for example, $55 million in damages were caused by the rioting. But when we're talking about a situation where people are stealing because they want to get back at a system that has not benefited them, so now they're serving their own interests, we can look at that $55 million price tag as the price people or government or private business will have to pay as a result of their unwillingness to police their police more efficiently, allowing the police to use things like the carotid restraint and allowing the police to shoot people in the face with rubber bullets, potentially killing them, right? And I've seen videos of 16-year-old girls bleeding out of their heads from rubber bullets because these police were not aiming at the abdomen or the arms, they were aiming at the face, which is what they're not supposed to do. So when we're looking at things like protesting and rioting, we're looking at tens of thousands of people who've been in this situation interacting with police, where the police are acting unjustly for decades and decades and decades. And you do kind of have to look at that from the perspective of how long can people put up with that injustice? How long can people idly sit by and take that type of suffering and pain, watching their family members die, then dying themselves, having children, and then having to just go through your life with the worry that your children could be killed by the police for no good reason, not in self-defense of themselves, but because they felt they needed to kill that person for whatever reason. And then there's nothing you can do about it. Your child is already dead, and these police aren't going to be tried for their crimes, so what do? I can't blame those people for reacting violently to a system that doesn't care about them.